We could have stayed standing and clapped for longer because that was just an amazing, amazing stories, weren't they, hey? And what you guys do beyond the borders of your church is quite phenomenal. It's a real example, I think, of the love of Jesus Christ. It's a tremendous expression of the kingdom, and it really does show the heart of your leadership. And I want to thank your pastors, Ashley and Alison Good. Let's just give them a round of applause, because that doesn't happen if the leader doesn't recognize that it's just not about what we can do here in the four walls of our building of a Sunday morning, as important as that is. And it's even just not what we can do in our own community, but it's what God has called us to do in the planet. It's what God has called us to do to the nations. And I'm so excited to share with you this morning that I get to stand in a church that I know has a heart, the heart of God for the nations. And it's just so incredible to be part and to be amongst you on a day like today. This is such an important day, and I thank you for the privilege of sharing on a day like today. You know, sometimes it's difficult, isn't it, to let go. We tend to hold on to what we've got so tight that we can't open up to receive what God might have for us next. But it might be hard to let go of so many different things. Sometimes you've got to let go of relationships. You know, sometimes it's the best thing to do. Sometimes you just got to turn your back and move on, but it's hard. Sometimes you let go of an object, something that you held and something that was important to you. But time's moved on and you got to let go of that, and it's hard. It's not easy. We were part of our church there in Ipswich for many decades. In fact, Francine was part of that church for 48 years. My wife was part of that church for 48 years. She was going before she was born, right? And and sometimes, you know, it's hard to let go of something that's been an important part of your life for a long time. But it's important, if God's got something more for you, to let go of what's in your hand so you can receive what God has next. Sometimes it's really difficult when God's putting his finger on your life and saying, you know that there's more for you, but for you to walk into what God's got for you, you've got to be able to let go of what I've given you now. It's not easy, folks, but I want to suggest to you that it's an incredible privilege to do so. And what I want to do today, if we can, I want to drop into a story that actually it's a happening from Jesus' life. It actually took place. This was not a parable. This was a teaching that Jesus gave that will, I think, blow your mind. It will put wind into your sails. Many of us really are not quite what we could be. We've not done too bad. We're doing all right, but there's more. And I just believe today that God wants to blow something into the wind of your sails, that if you can lean into what Jesus is going to teach us here in a moment, we're going to open up and just see what he has to say. I think something on the inside of you is just going to fill out that little bit more, that you're going to be just that much more the person that God has called you, that you have been gifted and you have been made to be. We're going to drop in on Jesus in Luke chapter 14 and verse 12. In Luke chapter 14 and verse 12. Look, if you're not a Christian here today, and I know there's a number of people watching online, and we thank you for joining with us. To those of you who are in your homes or traveling in your cars or wherever you might happen to be, it's great to have you with us here as well today. And maybe you wouldn't define yourself as a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. I don't know. I'm sure there's many in this room that probably wouldn't fall completely into that pot. And that's okay. I'm sure that everybody here, whether you're a Christian or not, you've seen relationships fall apart because of greed. Now, greed is something you can never identify within yourself. It's the inability to let go of something, but it's easier to see it in others than it is to see it in yourself, and to watch and observe how it destroys relationships. I'm sure you've all done that. And so if you have observed that, what I'm going to ask you to do is that even if you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, if you could give us the next 30 odd minutes and just lean into what Jesus is teaching us, and then for your own self, make a conclusion. as to whether or not, wow, that would take my life to another level or not. It will seem a little confusing to start with, but by the time we get to the end, I'm sure the penny will drop and you'll see something that maybe you've never seen before. So let's drop into this particular instance of Jesus' life in verse 12, and let's read together. It says, Jesus says to his host. Now, a bit of background. Jesus has turned up for dinner in a particularly palatial residence. The owner of this residence is high up in terms of social status in the community. There's a lot of people there, and Jesus addresses the host. He's speaking to the person who has invited him, or the person who is hosting the party. And he says this: when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you'll be repaid. Now let's just stop there for a moment. So you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm taking notes. I know the 10 Commandments, all right? Don't lie, don't steal, don't kill. And now there's another one. Don't invite relatives to a party. Just write that one down. Or friends. Some of you are writing with a little bit too more vigor than you should. No relatives to parties. Great. I now have scripture in verse. Not to invite certain people. I'd love to invite you, but Jesus says, I can't. I'm so sorry. Is that what's going on here, I ask? Let me give you some context to what Jesus is saying. The person he's talking to is not irrelevant in the context of this. He's talking to a person who functions in, who operates out of a patronage system. And the way it works is like this. It's like you invite certain people to your house and you ingratiate them, right? You throw this palatial, this party which has got more food and drink than you can actually afford, but you are currying favor here, all right? It's a patronage system where you buy gifts for certain people who in turn lend you money and grease the slides, if you will, for you to slide up to a higher social status. It's not so much a business, it's not so much a party as it is a business gathering, really, under a different kind of banner. But that's what he's really talking into. That's where he finds himself. So this gives you some context into what Jesus is talking about and why he's saying what he's saying. In this particular environment, your social status is determined by who you can get to the party. Now, you get this person to the party. We're having a 21st birthday party. We want to get the pastor. You're going to get the pastor to the party, or having an engagement party. There's certain people who want to get to the party, because if you can get them to the party, then you're assured of other people coming to the party who you want to meet, and then those people will open doors for you, and your business and your social standing and so forth will grow. So that's the patronage system, and that's what Jesus is addressing. That's what he's talking into. And then he says, but this is how I want you to behave. He said, don't do that. I want you to do this. And he says this: but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. To which you say, I don't know any lame. I'm off the hook. How can I invite lame? I don't know any. Maybe you might know some blind people. I don't know. But what he's saying here, what Jesus is saying, is he's actually embracing a teaching style called comparison and priority. Comparison and priority. Now, if you look a little bit down that same chapter, he makes this incredible phrase, which kind of is a little mind-blowing. This is actually in the Bible. Jesus actually did say this. He said, you must hate your father and mother if you want to be my disciple. What's with that, right? Some of you think, well, I make the tick. I don't know. I make the cut on that one. I qualify. No. It's comparison and priority. Right? Some of you will be aware that in the Ten Commandments, in fact, it says, honor your mother and father. So there seems to be a lack of complexity here, right? There's this, well, hang on a minute. How can I honor my father and mother and hate them? This seems to be contradictory. There's no congruence here. But you got to appreciate the teaching style Jesus is using. And when you understand this opens up our hearts and our minds to see the point that we can then apply to our lives, right? So he's using comparison and priority. And what he's saying is this, in terms of the mother and father thing, is that the love you have for God must be so incredible and so significant that the love you have for your parents is, almost zero in comparison, right? So that's what he's saying. It's a matter of priority and comparison. In comparison, you can't say, well, my family's here and God is there. You can't sort of have your God and your family. So like God is here and it's like there's no second place. It's like God is my number one priority and everything pales in comparison. That's what he's saying. He's not saying you don't love your parents, you don't love your, you can't take your eyes off your granddaughter. He's not saying that. Just saying. He's not saying that. That's perfectly normal and perfectly legitimate. But what he's saying is that in comparison to the love you have for God, there's literally no second place. You can't say, well, God is number one in my life, and then, my spouse is number two, and my kids or whatever. You can't do that. It's like God is number one, and daylight is second. And that's what it's got to be. If you want to be a follower, if you want to give your life and press into God, that's what he's saying. So when you understand that, I want to bring you back now to our party guy, and I want to bring the application of what he's saying to us now this morning. Because you might say, well, I don't live in this patronage system. I don't host parties and get certain people there to increase my social status and open business doors for me that I might become a wealthier human being. You might be sitting and say, well, that's not me. What's the relevance of this to us? And there is a very important principle here. Let me explain to you. Because the truth is, every one of us spend all kinds of money to maintain our social status. Certain clothes, certain places we want to go, restaurants we want to eat at, cars we want to drive, motorbikes we want to be able to race, or whatever it might happen to be. Certain shots we want to get to put on social media that kind of proves that we're just as cool as the next people. We go to incredible lengths and sometimes spend money we don't have to buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like. And what he's saying is, look, spend money if you need to on your social status. Spend money if you need to get the right look, to be in the right place, to be able to do the right kind of stuff. Spend money if you need to. But in comparison to what you give, in comparison to how you look after the lame and the blind and the poor and so forth, in comparison, there's no comparison. It's kind of like one is up here. It's kind of like the priority is what I give, and second place doesn't exist. It's kind of like, well, if you want to do it, you can do it. But in terms of the priority, my lifestyle goals are not leading the way. Priority and comparison. You see what Jesus is teaching us? You see what he's saying? Because many of you in this room, maybe you've thought to yourself, well, if I had that kind of money, well, I'd drive that kind of car. If I had that kind of dollars, I'd shop in those kind of places. I'd holiday in those kind of places or whatever. And what Jesus is saying is, look, that's because the priority in your hearts are a little mixed up. You're just a little confused by this world we live in and the spirit of the age has crept into your heart, Jesus is warning us, or he's teaching us, he's pointing us to something better. He's pointing us to a higher priority in terms of comparison. See, some of you maybe have even said, wow, this little card here, this is really important, this is great. And what you guys are doing in the Philippines and Uganda and Central Asia, honestly, folks, it really is without peer in terms of the size of your church. You guys are phenomenal. And I hope that as you watch those videos, that it was every heart, that everyone says, I'm part of this. I'm part of this. And if you say in your heart, well, if I just had a bit more money, then I would give. That's the issue. So you've got to switch the priority. What you need to be saying was, look, I'm giving. That's, mission and ministry is number one. Number two is daylight. And number 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, then maybe I can, I can spend some money. There's nothing wrong with spending money on those things, but it's a priority thing. It's that no. Number one is my ministry and my mission giving. I don't know if you ever heard of the farmer who had a cow with calf, right? Pregnant cow. And he was really excited because, the beef prices were up and he thought, this is going to be great. Eventually, in a few months' time, the calf will be born. We'll raise it for a few months, then we'll sell it. We'll take that money and we'll be able to pay our bills and maybe get a little bit ahead. And maybe I'll take the farmer's wife on a nice little holiday. It's going to be great. And finally the day comes and the cow gives birth, but not to one calf, but to 2. Well, the farmer's over the moon. He comes home and he says to his wife, he says, how we're expecting, the cow, the fresh calf, and we're going, well, guess what? The cow had 2 calves. Now we're going to have 2 sources of income. I'm going to raise them both. And because we're Christians, because we go to Life Church, I tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to take one of those cows, I'm going to fatten it up, I'm going to sell it, we're going to go on a holiday and pay our bills. I'm going to take that other cow, I'm going to fatten up, I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to take that money and I'm going to give it to a missions pledge. I'm going to give that money to the nations of the earth. This is exciting. I'm pumped. And so a couple of weeks goes past, a couple of months. One day he comes home, he's all forlorn, looking really worried, really concerned. And his wife says to him, what's wrong? He said, the calves, they both got crook and I nursed them and I fed them and one got strong and another one died. Oh, that's dreadful, the wife said. And the farmer said, yes, and the one that died was the Lord's one. And we were gonna, I was going to give that money, Pastor. I tell you what, if I was going to do it. And then that cow died. Oh, isn't that sad? And the wife said, I didn't know that you had deemed that one was God's and that one was ours. Oh, no, I had, he said, I had. And it was the Lord's one that died. Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, the sad truth is, it's always the Lord's calf that dies. It's the issue of priority, Well, if this goes well and that goes well, then I'll get involved. And, things didn't go so well. Oh, well, I won't get involved. I'll just put that away and I'll be praying. I'll do what I can, but I can't give. It's not my priority. I want to suggest to you that the teaching that Jesus gives here about this whole idea of money being spent on social status, that's what this teaching is actually about. I believe that this had found its way into the early church. And this is why 1 Corinthians 8, 1-3 reads as it does. My conviction is the Macedonian church had the revelation of what Jesus had just taught, because they said this, and brothers and sisters, in verse 1 of chapter 8, I want you to know the grace that God gave the Macedonian church in the midst of severe trials. the coward died. Their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up a rich generosity, for I testify they gave much more than they were able, and then beyond, entirely on their own. What had happened? See, what had happened to this church was the very thing that Jesus was teaching this Pharisee in this huge party on the day. And that is, listen, you can spend money on stuff you don't really need to impress people you don't really like, or you can take that which you need and give it away. And that's what had happened here. See, when you say things like, well, I'm really touched by what the Garbis are doing in the Philippines, what the Bartons are doing in Uganda, and I know your pastors and I and Francine and I have been to Kazakhstan, and we've looked into the eyes of those pastors and preached in those churches, and honestly, it's a moving experience. I've never seen anything like it. It's phenomenal. It really is amazing, and you guys are part of that. But when you say, and I know many of you in this room are so full of joy to be part of this, but there are others, and you think, well, if I just had a bit more, then I would be involved. It's just such an honor and a privilege, but I just can't quite make it. You see, what Jesus has said to this patronage guy is this: if you're not changing your lifestyle to give, you're not giving enough. Did you get that? That's the actual principle, right? If I bring it down to where we live, that's what he just said to this guy. What he just said to this guy, if you don't change your lifestyle, if your giving does not affect your lifestyle, then you're not giving enough. That's what he was saying to him. That's what we saw in the Macedonian churches. And this is the point I'm trying to make, is that you have to change your plans. You have to change your plans. We were going to do this, we wanted to do that, but those things are down here because our number one is prioritizing this missions, this ministry giving, looking after the lame and the poor and the blind and the weak and so forth. That's got to be number one. Now, I know this sounds shocking, and I'm not suggesting that we've got this sorted ourselves, right? This is a journey for all of us. For some of you, you're thinking, that just sounds unreasonable, right? That's not the 21st century, Aussie way. That doesn't fit with our lifestyle. I understand that. Jesus goes on, or when you put the whole of his teaching together, you can see that it's not just reasonable. In actual fact, it's not just a priority, it is a privilege. What he's asking this guy to do is not just a priority, it is indeed a privilege. Let me open up some more of this to show you why I say that. As I said, we're looking at Luke 14, verses 7 through 11. He's speaking to the guests. He's speaking to everybody. Verses 12 to 14, he's speaking to the host. We've just read a little bit of that. And then he speaks to one guest in particular. We're going to look at that in a moment. But he says to everybody, he says in verse 8, he says, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may be invited. And then, you might be bumped. That's embarrassing. The walk of shame, right? Oh, here we go. What Jesus is saying here, it's not about saving your pride, right? What Jesus is saying here is not just about being pragmatic. Don't come and take a place that's not yours and then, you get found, and you get pushed back and you feel bad about yourself. What he's saying here is the core of spiritual reality, and it's this. If you think that you deserve acceptance, if you think because of your lifestyle and because of the way you've been able to live your life that somehow that makes you acceptable to God, you are rejected. But if you come recognizing that within your own self you have nothing to offer, within your own self you shouldn't even be in the room, then God grabs you and he puts you in the place of honor. That's what he's saying. This is the spiritual life, folks. The lower the seat you take, the higher God will raise you. But what happens is while the rest of the world is trying to prove how important they are, how much social status they have, how much they should be towards the important seats at on this particular occasion, how much they deserve it, how much they ought to be there, then in God's economy, they just don't make it. You know, I heard an interesting fact the other day, which is something I didn't know. I'm quite like Billy Joel. Now, this possibly ages me a little bit, but I found out the other day that Billy Joel, right? Billy Joel never sells the front row of his concert seats. He never sells them. And the reason for that is just before the concert starts, he sends some people out into the crowd, gets people who are right up in the bleachers, right up in the back, he brings them down and he puts them on the front row. Because he says the people who can afford to sit there and say, well, entertain us, piano man. He says, you get the people from the bleachers and you bring them on the front row, they just can't believe their luck. He said, this guarantees you a good concert. Because the people who had no idea, think they'd ever be this close to the action, find themselves right in the firing line. And I just thought, wow, that's exactly what God did for me. I mean, I should have been way up there in the bleachers. You know what I'm saying? I was flat out getting into the room. I mean, the place was sold out. The tickets were gone. And God sent someone out and found me and put me on the front row. Whoa! How good is that? And that's what he's saying here. He's saying, if you recognize you can't get in, then God brings you to the front. And here's the profundity of this, right? While the rest of the world is looking for social status, approval, somehow I matter by getting into positions of power or by, increasing their capital worth or by projecting a certain image, we know that the God who created the universe has dragged us from the back blocks of nowhere and has put us right bang smack in the center of his will, right on the front row with him. What does this mean? This means that we don't have to spend money we don't have on things we don't need to impress people we don't like, because God's embraced us. When that gets into your heart, you are free to do what God is telling this man to do. Because you're not reliant now on the patronage system. You're not reliant on the right people and the right places open the right door for me, because God has opened the door of heaven for me. I don't need that anymore. When you understand that, everything changes. It becomes a privilege to give your stuff away, because you don't need it to make a statement about who you are anymore, because the statement's been made by Christ Jesus. We've been brought into his incredible circle. That's what he says to the crowd. We've looked at what he said to the host, and then he pulls out one particular person. And he says this. He says this to the host, actually, before he gets to the person. He says this. He says, you'll be blessed. Speaking to the host, you will be blessed. Talking about inviting the poor and the weak and so forth, right? Which you guys are inviting to heaven by this ticket. This is some people's ticket to heaven. The poor and the last and the least and the lost. He says, you'll be blessed, although they cannot repay you. Well, you know that. He says, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. What he's saying to them is, don't think that whatever you give, you lose, because that's not true. You don't need this world system to raise you up. I've placed you on the front row. And everything you give will be given back to you, pressed down, shaken together, and shaking out all over. He's talking about the final resurrection. Right now, you and I, we're in the waiting room, right? This life is like, it's like the departure lounge at the airport, right? You know, it's kind of comfortable, but you're kind of just waiting to get out, you know? It's a bit like this is the departure lounge because you're going some exotic place. And when we get there, I love what C.S. Lewis talks about when he talks about the resurrection, because he says that right now we experience life through our five senses. And you know this, you know, your sight and your hearing and your taste and your touch and smell, your five senses. That's how you interpret the world, through your five senses. C.S. Lewis's observation on this is incredible. He suggests that your resurrected self, rather than having five senses, could have 100 senses. Would make your current experience in comparison like you are now a vegetable. Your ability to experience joy now is comparative to what it's going to be then. You're like a vegetable now, right? You've only got five senses, and through that we experience this incredible world. But he says your resurrected self is going to be so much more superior. You're going to have ways to interpret stuff and experience stuff and feel stuff that you can't even know about now. And the point I'm making is this: is what he says to this guy is that the resurrection's a real thing. It's not some ethereal kind of one day you'll come back as a ghost and just sort of float through doors or whatever. There'll be a real person. You'll dance, you'll laugh, you'll touch, you'll sing. You'll be a real being, only at a higher level. That's why you can't lose. Because whatever you give now, you're going to get back in a state where you can experience it so far beyond the way you can experience it now. So what we've learned, what he's taught us is this: you have an internal wealth because God has raised you up, and you have a guaranteed future. Because one day your reward will be overwhelming in comparison to whatever you can do with your finances now. That's why it's an honor. It's actually a privilege. It's not just a priority. It's not something that we have to do. It's something that we get to do. I don't have to do this, right? Nobody really knows if I don't. No one's going to follow me up. No one's going to tap me on the shoulder. It doesn't matter if you don't, really. You know what I'm saying? You're not a second-class member of the church. You're not a second-class. It won't matter. It's not that you have to. It's that we get to. It's that it's a privilege to. It's an honor to. And we are free to, because we haven't got to climb some social status, and we don't have to fear missing out what went past, because there's more in return. Jesus speaks to this particular individual in verse 21, where he says, the servants came back and reported to their master. The owner of the house became angry and ordered the servants, because nobody had come. See, this party was on and nobody, the poor hadn't come, the lame hadn't come. He says, go quickly out in the streets and the alleys and the towns and bring the poor, the crippled, the blind and the lame. Sir, the servant said, what you've ordered has been done, but there is still room. The master told his servant, go out to the roads, the country lanes, and compel them to come in, that my house may be full. God wants his house full. And what he's told his servants here, who have done a great job going out and bringing people in, and many have come, but not as many as we're able to cater for. There's still a lot more room in the kingdom, right? There's still a lot of space in heaven. There's no population issues in the kingdom of God, folks. And what he's saying is, go out further. Go out beyond your comfort zone. Go out beyond where you live. Maybe you could go to the Philippines. Maybe, just maybe. Maybe you could go to Africa. Maybe, just maybe you could go to Central. Maybe. Maybe you could go beyond your own life and beyond your own nation and compel them to come. You say, well, how do I do that? I've got all these responsibilities. I'm doing this. Well, this is how you do it. That's why I love this. That's why I filled out one of these every year of my life for the last 20 years, personally. Because this is my ticket to do what these men have been told to do. Keep going out further, keep going out further, keep going out further. There's only so far I can go in my physical self, but I can send my influence. I can partner with these people all over the globe. They're doing incredible things for Jesus, and it's not just a priority, it's actually a privilege. It's something I get to do. Why? Because of what he's done for me. He deserved, didn't he? I mean, he deserved the place of honor in the banquet. Jesus Christ deserved the highest seat. But what did he do? He took the lowest seat, so he made the highest seat available to me. He went down so that I might go up. He sacrificed so that I could come in. And when you think about that, when you think about what he sacrificed for me, man, it only motivates me more to sacrifice for others. To sacrifice so that others might be able to experience what I have experienced. And that's what this is all about. That's why this is this morning so wonderful and such an honor for us to be here and be part of what this great church is doing. I mean, what you're doing here is just incredible on the Sunshine Coast and then in the nation beyond, and some of the things we saw with feeding kids in schools and educating them. And then what you're doing beyond that again into the nations is incredible. And when you think of what Jesus sacrificed to make that seat available for me, wow, doesn't that motivate you? Don't you think, wow, I just want to be able to sacrifice too? Because your sacrifice can make another seat available for somebody else who would never get into the party without this. This is their ticket to the party. This is their ticket to the party. And what he's saying to you today is, look, you may never go to Kazakhstan. You may never find yourself in Uganda or some third world country. Maybe you do. Maybe it's not where you're going to live. Maybe you got a house and a car and you're doing really well, and God bless you. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's your opportunity to go further out and compel them. Make a way for them to come. And they'll be just like many of us who think, well, me, I've got nothing to offer. I can't. Me? Not me. Look at my life. Look what I've done. I don't deserve it. But yes, you do. The very fact that you acknowledge, not by your own works, there's the key. In you come. And you'll be embraced in the beloved. Now, I've got to tell you this. There'll come a day, folks. There'll come a day. A glorious day when we are all united in one moment. There'll be people who'll come and they'll say, because you gave, I'm here. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were just talking before how grandkids, are a whole nother level of experience and love. Parenthood's a whole nother level of experience and love, right? This is going to be a whole nother level, right? As incredible as this is and as wonderful it is watching poor old Ash completely useless as he makes Google eyes out here. It's great, isn't it, eh? Fantastic. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And that's something you wouldn't have known until we had that experience, right? I'm just telling you, that's beautiful. But this is a whole nother level of beautiful. This is a whole nother level of beautiful. And this is our ticket. Your pastor has made a way for you. You should thank him. You should thank him on the way out. Say, thank you for making a way for me. And take this opportunity. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to hand it back to Ricky now. Father, Lord, thank you that you made an empty seat for me at the table. That, Lord, because of somebody else's sacrifice, I was compelled to come, and now I'm here, and I'm so thankful. Lord, as we now have an opportunity to make room for another chair, another seat at the table, for one of your beloved, one of the least, one of the last, one of the lost, one of the blind, the lame, the poor. Speak to us all and show us what you'd have us do, I pray right now in Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. Amen. Thank you, Pastor Ricky.